this nice outside, actually, when I'm in here. So I guess I'm curious why you people are in here and not outside, but that's fine. I appreciate you guys all being here. Just right off the bat, I feel like I should begin by admitting that I'm an immigrant. Get that out of the way. I'm here to do all the religion jobs Americans won't do. I was born in Iran in 1972. That's me. I know, I'm so cute it makes me want to puke. I mean, it's amazing. My family came to the United States in 1979 after the Iranian Revolution. I don't know if you remember the early 80s. It wasn't the best time in America to be either Muslim or Iranian, as opposed to now when it's like awesome. It's great now. It's fantastic now. This was, of course, at the height of the Iran hostage crisis. 444 days in which Americans were being held hostage in the embassy in Tehran. And, you know, for a 7-year-old kid trying his best to fit in and not be weird, it was very important for me to distance myself as much as possible from my culture, my heritage, certainly my religion. I've admitted on numerous occasions that I spent like a good part of the 1980s pretending to be Mexican. Which, by the way, tells you how little I understood America. It didn't help, actually, at all. It was tough. It was tough being a kid in the U.S., an Iranian kid in the U.S. In the 80s. I mean, you know, American kids rooted for Hulk Hogan. I rooted for this guy. Iron Shake, not a, yeah, there's one wrestling fan over there like, yeah, Iron Shake, yeah. You know, I had to watch, you know, Muslims and Middle Easterners on TV as kind of the comical bad guys. I don't know if you guys remember this movie, Not Without My Daughter. This was the movie, you know, it had Alfred Molina, who played an Iranian guy, because, you know, you don't want to find an Iranian guy to play an Iranian guy, but he was, you know, he was like a really nice guy, beautiful guy, and then he took his wife and his daughter to Iran, and then he became one evil guy. This movie, and I'm not joking, this movie ruined my sex life. Just absolutely, I couldn't date any white girls after this movie came out. Or, you know, you had the token movies, True Lies, that was one of my favorite examples of the token bad Muslim guy who would just, you know, scream Allahu Akbar and then shoot bullets in the air for some reason. A real waste of bullets. Even as a kid, I realized that. But this is basically the childhood that I had to experience here. And at the same time, I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I never really had that difficult of a time feeling American. I mean, I think this is what's amazing about the American identity. In most countries of the world, even today, in most countries of the world, national identity is predicated upon, you know, some measure of homogeneity, right? Either we're all the same ethnicity, or, you know, we share a culture in common, or a religion in common, or a language in common. That's kind of how you define national identity in large parts of the world. But we can't really do that in America. I mean, this is the problem with a country made up of immigrants, is that we can't all rally around some kind of single identity, some homogeneous notion of what it means to be American, whether it's cultural or religious, or even, you know, language. I mean, I live in Los Angeles. We do not all speak the same language in Los Angeles. And so what do we have to do? We instead form our national identity through adherence to a set of values, a set of ideals. It's kind of a beautiful thought. It's miraculous that it's worked for 240 years, but it has worked. And so the promise is pretty simple, that if you just come to these shores, and if you accept those ideals, if you accept those values, then you're as American as anyone else. And so it was very easy for me, despite all the anti-Muslim and anti-Iranian sentiment that I was confronting as a kid, it was very easy for me to feel American. And by the way, this is true even after the attacks of 9/11. I think a lot of people, I mean, it's, you know, 16 years ago, we've in many ways, forgotten those events. But what I think is important to remember is that after the attacks of 9/11, there wasn't that huge backlash against Muslims that a lot of people were worried about. Yes, of course, there were incidences of violence and bigotry, but they weren't the norm. On the contrary, if you recall, the aftermath of those attacks, what you saw instead was a rally in this country to its Muslim population. You had politicians, the president himself, saying that, listen, if we are engaged in a war of ideas, then the most powerful weapon in our arsenal is the 3.5 million Muslims here who have so thoroughly integrated into American society. They should be on the front line of this battle. And so even after that event, that catastrophic event, I never really felt as though I was being otherized. But things have started to change over the last few years, and the polls, basically speak for themselves. What you are seeing is an unprecedented surge in anti-Muslim, anti-Middle Eastern sentiment in the United States. And what's really fascinating about it is that it's not actually tied to fear of terrorism. The poll after poll, research after research shows this. And indeed, when you look at this, like 61% of Americans who have a negative view of Islam, that's 20 points higher than in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. So something is going on here. This steady, gradual progress of fear and animosity towards Muslims. It's not a sudden thing. And in fact, we know exactly how this arose because a think tank by the name of Center for American Progress issued a wide-ranging multi-year report in which they discovered exactly how these numbers started to tick up. They noticed that there was a cabal, a small group of individuals and organizations that had been funded to the tune at the point that they released their report a couple of years ago. At that point, it was about $46 million. I believe it's now more than $60 million in order to convince Americans that there is an enemy within. They called this group Fear Inc. And a lot of these individuals you've heard of before, this anti-Muslim fringe. There's, of course, Robert Spencer. Robert Spencer runs a website called Jihad Watch, a kind of blacklist for Muslims and anybody who speaks up for Muslims. Robert Spencer, of course, is also the same guy who said a few years ago that the decision by Campbell's Soup to issue a line of halal soups to go with its kosher line was the first step in the Muslim takeover of America. So clearly he's a moron. Yeah, because that's our secret plan, is soup. That's how we're gonna get you. Robert Spencer, of course. Pamela Geller. Pamela Geller, very famous, runs a number of anti-Muslim websites. Pamela Geller, quite famously in 2008, said that Barack Obama was actually the bastard Muslim love child of Malcolm X. Look it up. I'm not kidding.
What the hell?
This is a woman who, of course, spent the last 8 years talking about the Muslim in the White House declaring jihad in America. This is who we're talking about. We have, of course, Brigitte Gabriel. Some of you may be familiar with the organization Act for America, an anti-Muslim group designated not just by the Southern Poverty Law Center, but also by the ADL as an official hate group. Act for America is really interesting. They actually were denied trademark by the United States government because the trademark office couldn't figure out what they do except hate. So they couldn't even get a trademark. So this is an organization that the US government itself designates as a hate group. There's, of course, Frank Gaffney. Frank Gaffney, who is, I think the nicest way to refer to him is as a whack job. I think that's the official. Frank Gaffney is kind of famous for the fact that before Milo, he was, I think, the only conservative speaker to ever have been disinvited from CPAC. So basically, it's like a pederast and Franklin. Okay, and Gaffney, Frank Gaffney. He runs a think tank. Not really a think tank. It's a fake think tank They issue reports, these sort of pseudo-scientific reports warning about the impending Muslim takeover of America. Apparently, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the 1% of the population of this country that's Muslim is on the verge of a total takeover of this country. I didn't know if you knew that. Actually, that's not true, but when we get to 2%, then you're in trouble. Then the White House is ours. Again. And then, of course, there's Daniel Pipes, the thinking man's Islamophobe. Daniel Pipes actually is the guy that I worry about the most because his argument is pretty simple. It's not the jihadists and the terrorists and those guys that you need to worry about. It's the Muslim who is actually absorbed into American culture, the one who's assimilated, the guy who actually accepts democracy and pluralism, the one who has been here for generations and who drives a bus. The normal Muslim, that's the one who'll get you. That's Pipes's argument. He actually coined a term for this. He called it sudden jihad syndrome.